The garage smelled of motor oil and warm metal when she walked in. Tate Hollister did not look up. His hands were black to the wrist, buried in the open hood of a silver prototype that did not belong in a town like Boise. Somebody in the back let out a low whistle at the woman standing in the doorway. Tate spoke without raising his eyes. "You're too beautiful for a poor mechanic, ma'am." A small laugh moved through the bay and died fast. Marlo Pierce took 2 steps closer and stopped within arm's reach of him. Her voice came quiet. "To me, you're perfect." His wrench stopped turning. Nobody moved. Before any of that happened, before the wrench went still and the bay went quiet, there was a stretch of interstate outside Boise and a woman driving alone in a car that was not supposed to fail. Marlo Pierce had taken the Phantom 7 out on I-84 at 6 in the morning to prove a point. Her board did not believe in the car. Her board did not entirely believe in her. She had inherited Pierce Motor Works from her father 2 years earlier, and in 2 years she had learned that inheritance was a kind of slow audit. Every choice she made was being scored by men who had known her since she was 9. Half of them had bounced her on a knee at one company picnic or another. None of them had ever expected to call her ma'am. The car died 40 miles from the city. No warning, no flicker, just a soft mechanical sigh and a dashboard going dark. She steered onto the shoulder and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The hazards she switched on by reflex. The dust the morning wind threw against her door settled in slow drifts along the running board. She called the only number her assistant could find that would tow a prototype without leaking photos to a trade blog by lunchtime. The garage was a low brick building on the south end of Boise, set back from the road behind a chain-link fence. The sign above the bay doors read Hollister and Daughter in plain block letters. There was no website. There was no logo. There was a hand-painted line underneath that said honest work, honest hours. The paint on the door was faded in patches where the morning sun reached it longest. Inside, somebody had set a tin can of wildflowers on the workbench by the cash register, and the flowers were a little tired but still there. Tate Hollister had opened the bay door at 7 that morning, the way he opened it every morning. He had walked his 8-year-old daughter Junie to the bus stop. He had called her teacher about a late tuition payment and promised to bring the check by Friday. He had drunk a cup of coffee standing at his workbench, looking at nothing. He was 41 years old. He had been doing this for 3 years. There were calluses on his hands that had not been there when he was a younger man, and there was a quiet in his shoulders that had not been there either. The quiet was the bigger change. When the tow truck rolled in with the Phantom 7 on its bed, Tate set down his coffee and walked out into the lot. Marlo stepped down from the cab of the tow. She was tired, and she was annoyed, and she did not have time for small towns. Her phone had been ringing since the engine cut out, and she had stopped answering after the 3rd call. "Can you fix it today?" she asked. "Probably not today," Tate said. He was already looking at the wheel wells. "Pop the hood." She popped the hood. He leaned in. 3 seconds, maybe 4. The other men in the bay had gone quiet without being asked. "Your alloy block has a casting flaw," he said. "I've seen this one before." She gave a short, dry laugh. "Where did you read up on the Phantom 7 exactly?" "I read the patent," Tate said, and stepped back from the engine. "I'll need to order a part. Earliest is tomorrow morning. There's a motel 2 blocks down that won't recognize you." She stared at him. "I'll get you a quote by close of business," he said, and walked back into the office. Marlo stood in the lot a moment longer than she meant to. The wind moved a loose piece of paper across the asphalt. From inside the bay, she could hear someone start an air compressor and someone else swear about a stripped bolt. She did not know yet why his sentence had stopped her in the lot. She would think about it later. She would think about it for a long time. At 6 that evening, Tate locked up and drove home in a truck that had been new in 2004. The house was a 1-story bungalow on a side street, paint peeling at the porch rail, a tire swing in the yard. Junie was at the kitchen table when he came in, a book open in front of her. She looked up and smiled the way she always smiled, like the day had been waiting for him. "Hey, kid." "Hey, Daddy." He warmed soup. She told him about a girl at recess and a math problem with a trick in it. He listened the way he always listened, with his whole face. She asked, between spoonfuls, if he had any special customers today. He thought about the woman in the lot. He did not answer. Junie watched him for a moment, then went back to her soup. She was used to the spaces in his sentences. She had grown up inside them. Marlo came back to the garage at 8 the next morning. Tate already had half the engine apart, parts laid on a clean towel in the order he had removed them. He did not greet her. He did not need to. She pulled up a stool and sat down and watched him work. After a while, he wiped his hands and asked if she wanted coffee. They walked across the street to a diner with vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone honey. Marlo ordered black. Tate ordered the same. The waitress brought 2 cups and a small steel pitcher of cream that no one had asked for, and set it between them out of habit. "Where did you go to school?" she asked. "Public school." "Before that." "Public school," Tate said, and changed the subject to the weather. She let him. She watched him stir nothing into the coffee he had not asked for cream in. She noticed his hands. She noticed that the calluses were on the fingers a man who only worked under hoods would not have. She kept that observation to herself. Around 4, Junie came by the garage after school, a backpack riding low on her shoulders. She stopped when she saw Marlo and went a little shy, then walked over and held out a thin paperback book. "Wind Turbines and How They Work." "You like wind turbines?" Marlo asked. Junie nodded. "And cars, but mostly wind turbines." Marlo lowered herself onto one knee so her eyes were level with the girls. "You know that the blade angle is the most important thing on a turbine." Junie's eyes went very wide. "You know about pitch?" "I know a little about pitch." Tate watched them from the workbench. He did not move. The wrench was loose in his hand. That night, in her motel room, Marlo opened her laptop and typed in his name. The first article was 10 years old. Tate Hollister, founder of Hollister Precision Engineering, MIT class of 2006, holder of the T7 alloy patent, the same alloy currently cast into every engine block her company produced. He had left the company 3 years earlier, the article said, citing personal loss. Hollister Precision had gone private the same month. The patent had been transferred into a family trust. No interviews, no statement. The trade press had moved on after a week. There had been bigger collapses to write about that quarter. She looked at the photo for a long time. The man in it was younger and clean-shaven and almost smiling. She could see him in the man at the garage, and she could not see him at all. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. She answered without looking. "Marlo." It was Maddox Kerr, chairman of the Pierce board. His voice had the calm of someone who had already won several arguments she did not know they were having. "I hear you're stranded in Boise." "It's a casting flaw," she said. "We'll have it by tomorrow. The board wants to vote on Phantom 7 next week. I'm flying down. I think we should hold the session there. Save you the drive." She hung up a minute later. She looked back at the photo on her screen. She looked at the dark window. 2 blocks away, a single light was still on in the back of a garage. She drove there in the morning. She did not bring coffee. She did not bring small talk. "You're Tate Hollister of Hollister Precision," she said. He kept his hands on the engine for a moment. Then he wiped them on the rag in his back pocket, slower than the job required. "That man died with my wife." He did not say more. She did not push. She watched his shoulders and saw the work it took for him to keep them where they were. From the back room, Junie came out clutching a folded piece of paper. A pencil drawing of a turbine, 3-bladed, careful. She showed it to her father first. He looked at it the way men in churches look at the things they love. Then she walked it over to Marlo. "For you," Junie said. Marlo took it carefully, the way one takes a thing made of glass. "Thank you." The 3 of them stood there a moment in the bay with the drawing between them. The light coming through the high windows of the shop made long, bright stripes on the concrete floor. None of them filled the silence. Later, Marlo told him about herself. Her father had founded Pierce Motor Works out of a converted aircraft hangar in 1994. She had taken over after his stroke. The board thought she was too young, too soft, too much her father's daughter. She talked about it the way Tate had talked about public school. He listened without correcting anything. He did not offer advice. He did not say he understood. He did not need to. When the alloy block was ready to set, he handed her a torque wrench to hold steady while he tightened a bolt. Her hand brushed his. Neither pulled away in the second it took for him to find the thread. The bolt seated. He nodded once. She set the wrench back on the bench. She did not move away from the engine. He did not move away from her. It was a small thing, and it was the first thing. The garage door rolled up at the end of the lot. 2 men walked in. The first was tall, gray at the temples, in a coat that had not come from Boise. Maddox Kerr, the second, was a young assistant carrying a folio that was a size too large for the small bay. They moved with the particular quietness of men who were used to being noticed and were trying not to be noticed yet. Maddox looked at Tate, took in the oil and the coveralls, and did not bother to nod. "Is the help here helping?" Marlowe did not introduce them. She watched Tate's face. Tate kept his eyes on the wrench. Maddox drew her aside near the office door. "You're wasting time here," he said. "I've arranged the board session for the day after tomorrow. Our satellite office downtown. I think it's time you came back to the city of grown-ups." He left. The assistant followed 2 steps behind, head down. The bay was quiet for a long second after the door swung shut. Tate set the wrench down without looking up. "That's the chairman. That's the chairman. He doesn't know who I am." "No, he doesn't." Tate finally looked at her. "Let's keep it that way for now." The board session was set for Thursday morning. Marlowe asked Tate to come, not as a founder, not as the man on the laptop screen, but as an independent engineering consultant. He shook his head. "I don't go back into rooms like that." She did not argue. She said his name once and let it go. She left the garage and drove the long way back to the motel because she did not yet trust her face. That night she came by the house to return a coffee thermos she had borrowed at the garage. She did not have to return it that night. She told herself she did. Junie answered the door, lit up at the sight of her, and pulled her by the hand into the kitchen. Tate was at the table with a pile of small gears, teaching his daughter the difference between spur and helical. Marlowe stood in the doorway watching them for a moment before either of them noticed her. The kitchen was small and clean, and the dish towel by the sink was folded the way her grandmother had folded dish towels. The refrigerator hummed. Junie tugged at her sleeve. "Are you staying for dinner?" Tate looked up. He did not say anything. She stayed. There was chicken and rice. There was conversation about the school play. Junie wanted to be a tree. Marlowe asked what kind. Junie said an oak, because oaks had character. Tate watched the two of them across the table and ate slower than he usually ate. After Junie went to bed, Marlowe and Tate sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee neither of them was drinking. "I don't need you to save the company," she said. "I need you in the room so I'm not standing alone." He looked at her for a long time. The kitchen clock made a sound. "Okay," he said. The next day, he went through the Phantom 7 from bumper to bumper. He found 3 design issues the Pierce engineering team had missed. A cooling line routed too close to a high-load joint, where vibration would over time create a hairline crack, and a slow coolant loss no diagnostic would catch until it was too late. A torque spec on the engine mounts that did not match the alloy's stress curve and would, under a hard launch, allow the block to walk a fraction of an inch and ruin its own bearings. A diagnostic blind spot in the firmware where a particular sensor failure would log as a software fault, sending the wrong technician with the wrong tools to a problem that was, at heart, mechanical. He explained each one in plain English, with hand-drawn sketches on shop paper, the pencil moving in small confident lines. He did not raise his voice. He did not look pleased with himself. He labeled the parts the way a teacher labels parts, in small block capitals, with arrows that did not overshoot. When Marlowe asked a question, he answered it. When she asked a follow-up he had not expected, he stopped for a second, then answered that one too. He was not performing for her. He was not performing for anyone. He had simply, for the first time in 3 years, opened a door he had been keeping closed, and behind it the engineer he used to be was still standing there waiting. Marlowe stood beside him under the bay lights, and saw for the first time the man from the old photograph and the man in the coveralls at the same time. He did not lift his chin when he talked about the alloy. He just talked, the way men talk about a kitchen they have lived in for many years. She watched his hands move across the paper. She watched the line of his jaw. She did not say anything about either. Thursday morning, the Pierce satellite office. A long table. The board. 12 people, most of them men who had known her father. Maddox at the head. Marlowe at the foot, Tate in a clean shirt, no tie, sitting 1 seat down from her. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at a foothill. The morning light came in flat and uncomplicated, and made everyone in the room look older than they wanted to look. He walked them through the 3 issues. He used the sketches. The Pierce engineering lead pushed back, defensive, then quiet, then quieter. Then a man at the far end of the table, a retired aerospace executive named Hal Whitaker, set his coffee down, and asked Tate a follow-up question about the alloy's fatigue threshold. Tate answered it. Hal nodded once and looked at Maddox. Maddox cut in before Hal could speak again. "A local mechanic is going to teach us about EVs?" Marlowe did not speak. Inside her chest, something rose and was held down. She did not have the votes to fight him in public. Not yet. She had counted twice on the drive over. The board, taking its cue from the chairman, voted to pause the Phantom 7 program, pending what Maddox called a comprehensive review. Marlowe watched the hands go up. She made herself count them, 7 for the pause, 4 against. Hal abstained, which was the closest thing to a kindness anyone in the room had offered her that morning. Outside in the parking garage, she apologized to Tate. "I should have said something." "You shouldn't have," Tate said. "You needed the count." He looked at the concrete ceiling for a moment, then at her. "But I'll talk for you when it's time." She looked at him for a long second. She did not say thank you. He would not have known what to do with it. Junie was in the back of the car with a book, picked up after school by an aunt of one of the shop guys who had agreed to drop her at the office. When Marlowe walked past the open door, Junie reached out and took her hand, easy, like she had been doing it for years. Marlowe held on for 2 seconds and then had to turn her face away. Tate saw. Tate did not say anything. Tate had been doing not saying anything for 3 years, and he was good at it, and it had cost him more than he had counted. A woman in a sharp navy coat stepped out from behind a column. Della Marks, the chief operating officer of Pierce Motor Works. Marlowe knew her face. Marlowe did not know what Della's voice sounded like. When it dropped to the register, it dropped too now. "I need to tell you something about Mr. Hollister," Della said, "and about Maddox. Before this gets any worse." That evening, in Marlowe's hotel room, Della laid an old leather portfolio on the desk and opened it. The portfolio had a name embossed in the corner that was not Della's current married name. She had carried it for a long time without using it. The leather was scuffed at the corners, where it had ridden in the same drawer of the same desk through 3 jobs and 1 move across the country. "I was junior counsel at Hollister Precision 10 years ago," Della said. "I knew Claire. I knew Tate when he still wore a suit. Claire used to bring lunch to the office on Wednesdays. She would sit in the conference room with her boots on the chair and ask the youngest associates what they were working on, and she meant the question. She made the place feel like a place worth working at. I wanted you to know that part before I tell you the rest." She turned a page. 10 years ago, Maddox was at a fund called Stark Ridge Capital. They wanted the T7 alloy patent. The Pentagon had just shortlisted it for a long-term contract. Stark Ridge couldn't buy Hollister outright, so Maddox arranged to break the company instead. He fed forged supplier numbers into a research note. He used 3 different analysts to launder the same lie. The stock cratered in a single afternoon. The plan was to walk in the next week at a discount and take the patent. She turned another page. It didn't work. Tate took the company private inside 48 hours and folded the patent into a family trust before Maddox could move. Stark Ridge dissolved the position. Maddox moved on. Most people forgot. I did not forget. I just didn't talk about it. Marlowe was very still. "The night Claire died," Della said. She was driving home from an emergency strategy meeting at the firm. She had been awake for 2 days. The meeting was about how to keep the company alive long enough for the Pentagon contract to come through. "I have always believed Maddox owns a piece of that. I never said it out loud. I was afraid for my job. I was afraid for a lot of things. I was 31. I had loans. I told myself the silence was temporary." She slid a folder across the desk. The original forged numbers. The internal emails. My personal notes from the time. It's enough to bury him. Marlowe opened the folder. She closed it again. She did not need to read it tonight. She needed it to exist tonight. That was a different thing. "There's one more thing," Della said. 6 months ago, I started seeing license fees in our cost structure I couldn't trace. Phantom 7 uses the T7 alloy. We license it from a holding company in Delaware. I pulled the chain. The holding company is owned by another holding company. Eventually, it ends at Maddox Kerr's personal trust. Marlowe looked up. He's been collecting our license money in his own pocket. 11 months of it. And the only way he gets clean ownership of T7 is if he owns Pierce. He's been setting up a buyout of Pierce for almost a year. The pause is on production. The whisper campaigns about your leadership. The board reshuffles. You are the way he finally takes the patent. You have been the way the whole time." Marlo sat with her hands flat on the desk for a long time. The hotel air conditioner cycled on and off. Somewhere down the hall a door closed. "I have to tell Tate. I think he should choose how this is used," Della said. The clock on the desk read 11:37. Marlo got her coat. She drove to the garage. The light was on in the back. Tate was at the bench, finishing a job that had not asked to be finished tonight. The radio was off. The bay smelled of cooling metal and the faint sweetness of cut wood from a small carpentry project propped against the far wall. She did not tell him about Maddox. Not yet. She sat down on a stool and watched him work. He poured her coffee from a thermos without being asked. They sat like that for a while. There was a moth at the work lamp. The clock above the office door read just past midnight. Outside, a freight train went through the south end of town on the rail line 2 streets over, the way it did every night, and the bay glass rattled the small way it always rattled when the train came through. Tate did not look up. He had stopped noticing the train years ago. She listened to it the way a person listens to a sound that belongs to someone else's life. She asked him finally, the question she had been carrying since the diner. "Why did you leave?" He set down the wrench. He talked low and even, like a man giving directions to a place he never wanted to see again. "Claire." The last board meeting, the 2-day window when everything could have gone the other way. Junie at 4, sitting on the kitchen counter in pajamas, asking when Mama was coming home. The hospital. The corridor with the bad fluorescent light, the woman at the desk who had called him sir in a voice that meant he was supposed to be brave now, the drive home alone, the decision that had not felt like a decision so much as a door he had walked through without choosing to, the understanding, sudden and complete, that he could not be the man in those rooms anymore, the patent in trust, the doors closed, the garage rented. The first morning he had opened the bay alone and stood there in the cold breathing. The first customer who had called him by his first name and not his title. The first night Junie had fallen asleep on the loft cot listening to him work, and the small relief he had felt that her childhood was going to be made of this and not of boardrooms. "I didn't quit engineering," he said. "I quit the room." Above them, in the small loft over the office where Tate had built a cot for the nights he worked late, Junie woke and came down the stairs in her sock feet, hair flat on one side. She climbed onto her father's lap, sleepy, and then slid across to Marlo and put her head against Marlo's collarbone like she had been doing it forever. She smelled of soap and sleep. She did not say anything. Children with quiet fathers often do not need to. Marlo held her. Her eyes were wet. She did not cry. Tate watched them both in the yellow light of the work lamp. Nobody said anything for a long time. The moth went on circling. When she went to leave, he walked her to her car. They stood at the open door. He did not speak. She did not speak. The back of his hand brushed the back of hers. She got into the car. She drove the 3 blocks back to the motel slower than she needed to. She would tell him about Maddox in the morning. Morning came clear and cold. She came into his kitchen carrying the folder. She set it on the table next to the salt shaker and a half-eaten piece of toast. Junie was still asleep down the hall. The coffee pot was full. Tate had been up since before sunrise. He had known she would come. She told him everything. The forged numbers, the Pentagon contract, the 2-day window, the buried holding company, the license fees, the 11 months of money flowing out of Pierce and into one man's trust, the plan to take Pierce in order to take the patent. She told it like a report, because that was the only way she could say it without her voice doing things. She kept her eyes on the folder for most of it. When she finished, she made herself look at him. He sat very still. He did not get angry. He had not allowed himself to be angry for 3 years. The anger was there. He had set it on a shelf and refused to take it down. He took it down now, carefully, the way a man takes down a tool he has not used in a long time and wants to make sure still works. When she was done, he asked one question. "What do you want me to do?" "Stand next to me in that room," she said. "One more time." He nodded. She called the Hollister Trust's outside counsel from his kitchen and triggered the license clawback clause. The counsel, an older man named Brennan who had drafted the trust 3 years earlier and never expected to use this provision, asked her twice if she was certain. She was certain. Tate, listening from the stove, nodded once when the counsel asked if Tate concurred. Brennan said he would have papers ready by morning. He sounded faintly, like a man who had been waiting a long time for this phone call. She called Della. Della was already up. Della had been up. They spoke for less than a minute. Della would meet them at the satellite office. Della would bring the box. Della would not say anything to anyone before then. Junie came in for breakfast. She looked at Marlo across the table. "Are you going to come back?" she asked. Marlo glanced at Tate. He was pouring coffee. He did not look up. "I'll try, sweetheart." Tate's hand slowed on the pot for half a second. He kept pouring. That night, 4 tires on Marlo's rental car were slashed in the motel parking lot. The night clerk called Tate because Marlo had listed the garage as her local contact. He was there in 11 minutes. He walked around the car once. He did not say anything for a long time. He looked up at the security camera mounted over the office. He looked at the angle. He looked at the empty space underneath where another camera had once been mounted and was now gone. Then he said, "Tonight you sleep at the garage. Junie's on the loft. I'm on the couch in the office." She did not argue. She followed him back in his truck. Junie woke up briefly when they came in and made room for Marlo on the loft without being asked. Nothing happened that night except a kitchen light at the back of the bay that stayed on later than it usually did, and a man on a too-short couch who did not sleep. Friday morning. The Pierce Motor Works satellite office. The full board, in person. Maddox at the head of the table, confident, polished, a man who had already counted his votes. He was prepared for Marlo to come in offering a controlled sale, a graceful exit, the long, quiet retirement he had been preparing her for. He had even prepared a small speech about her father's legacy. He had practiced it once in the car. The folder in front of him contained the share transfer documents he intended to present as a kindness. The doors opened. Marlo walked in. Tate walked in beside her, in a plain dark jacket, no tie. Della walked in 3 steps behind, carrying a banker's box. The box was heavier than it looked. She set it on the table with the small, dull sound of finality. Maddox smiled a small, tired smile. "You brought your mechanic again." Marlo stopped at the foot of the table. Her voice was level. "I brought the founder of Hollister Precision Engineering." The room did not move. 2 board members looked at Tate and then looked at him again. One of them set down a pen. Hal Whitaker, at the far end, leaned slowly back in his chair as if the air in the room had just changed temperature. He had been around long enough to know the sound of a board meeting that was about to stop being the meeting it had thought it was. Tate placed a slim folder on the table. He spoke without raising his voice. "The Hollister Trust is revoking the T7 alloy license effective immediately. Phantom 7 cannot be produced without it." He paused. "A new license will be issued directly to Pierce Motor Works, with no intermediary, on one condition. Mr. Kerr is no longer on this board." Della stepped forward and opened the box. The forged numbers from Stark Ridge. The internal emails between Maddox and the analysts. The Delaware Holding Company. The chain back to Maddox's personal trust. The license payments routed away from Pierce shareholders and into one man's pocket for 11 months. The receipts, the wire confirmations, the signed acknowledgments. The room read in silence. Pages turned. A senior board member who had served with Maddox for 16 years, took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Another, a woman named Hetty Aldrich, who had not spoken in the previous meeting at all, looked up from a page and stared at Maddox with the flat, steady look of someone who had just decided how she was voting. Hal Whitaker, 2 seats down, closed the folder in front of him and folded his hands on top of it. Maddox stood up. The polish was gone now, and what was underneath was older and uglier. He looked around the table once. No one met his eyes. He looked at Tate across the table. "You did all this for her?" Tate looked at him for a long moment. "I did this for my wife." He looked at Marlo. "And for here." The board voted before lunch. Maddox was removed. 2 of his closest allies resigned within the hour to avoid the same vote. The license was reissued to Pierce on clean terms. The Phantom 7 program went back into production by the end of the month. The first car off the revised line was, by Marlo's private decision, driven straight to a garage on the south end of Boise, where it sat for an afternoon while an 8-year-old climbed in and out of it, making the noises children make when they cannot find a word large enough for what they are looking at. Tate stood in the doorway with a coffee and watched them. He did not get in the car. He did not need to. Tate did not take a title. He did not take an office. He went back to the garage on the south end of Boise and opened the bay door at 7 the next morning. The way he opened it every morning, the only thing that changed was a small wooden sign he hung beside the original one. It read Hollister and Daughter, Engineering Consultation. Junie helped him paint the letters. She insisted on doing the ampersand herself. The ampersand came out crooked. He did not fix it. Marlowe moved the Pierce Research and Development Center to Boise. It took 6 weeks. The board, what was left of it, did not argue with her again. Hal Whitaker became interim chair and ran the meetings like a man who had finally been allowed to do the job he had wanted to do for a decade. Della stayed on as chief operating officer. She kept the old leather portfolio in her bottom drawer and never opened it again. The Pentagon contract, after a decade of waiting, was finally signed in the third quarter of that year, and was signed in Marlowe's name, and was witnessed by a man in a clean jacket and no tie who sat in the back of the room and did not speak. Some weeks later, on a clear evening, Marlowe came by the garage with a paper bag from a tie place 2 streets over. Junie was already asleep up in the loft, a book tented over her chest. Tate was rolling the bay door down for the night. The streetlights along the block were starting to come on one by one. The air had the first faint coolness of a season changing. A neighbor across the street was raking leaves into a small, careful pile, and waved at Tate as he passed. And Tate waved back, the small, ordinary wave of a man known by the people on his block. They ate at the workbench. They did not say much. She watched a moth circle the work lamp. He watched her watch the moth. "Do you regret coming back?" she asked. He thought about it. "I didn't come back to that world," he said. "I just stopped hiding from this one." She took a step closer. He reached up and tucked a piece of hair behind her ear. His hand was clean for once. It rested there a moment longer than it needed to. "You told me once I was perfect," he said. "I meant it." They stood there under the old bay light, in a small garage on a quiet street, in a city neither of them had been planning on. He did not kiss her. She did not kiss him. They stood close, and her hand found his, and his fingers closed around hers in the careful way men hold things they have decided not to drop. Somewhere down the block a screen door closed. The work lamp hummed its small, steady hum. The night smelled of cooling asphalt, and the faint sweetness of the desert wind that came in off the foothills after the sun went down. Up in the loft, a child turned in her sleep and smiled at nothing in particular. Neither of them had been looking, but both of them had been found,